We might, we'll do our best to be as good as the sunshine is outside. We're going to get cracking, but just before we do, I hope you enjoyed lunch. I did tell you a couple of times to have a look. I just wondered if we might just say a big thanks to Griff and Stella, who are over there. It was fabulous. Huge thanks. Do have a look at the back, follow the QR code, watch the video, but yeah, I'm lost for words still digesting some of that food, I think is perhaps the accurate one. Many thanks indeed. All the very best. Right, so let's get into this afternoon. We're going to change gears a little bit. So we started the day thinking about that big imperative that we need. Why do we need to act? What are we getting on with? We started thinking about some of those big topics, and we've deliberately taken a crack at some of the ethics that sit around this. What we're going to do now is we're going to move into thinking a bit more about action, doing stuff. We're pioneers, but thankfully some have already got ahead of us and started that journey. They've been experimenting, they've been doing things on the ground and making progress. And we're going to kick that off through these sessions. 3 quick talks, about 10 minutes each. Well, in fact, the first one's going to be 5 minutes because we're going to get a video to bring the first 5 minutes to life. So delighted to, I'll introduce them along the way. The first is going to be from Iford Estate, and Ben Taylor, the managing director, will join us and bring this to life in a minute. But before you take to the stage, time for a video for the next few minutes.
I really love looking after this really special little corner of the southeast. It's a beautiful place to be and to work, and if we can make it better through everything that we're trying to do, then that's a really fantastic thing. I'm Ben Taylor, and I'm the managing director of the Iford Estate. 10 years ago, I had a bit of an epiphany. I began to notice what was around us, and at that point I realised that actually we had something really special, something that needed preserving, enhancing and making better. The Robinson family came here in 1895. They were dairy farmers, but they were also very keen conservationists, and they deliberately kept areas out of intensive arable production after the war. And we've gradually devoted more and more of the farm to the environment. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've begun to really focus on the environment as actually a means of sustaining the business for the next generation. Anthony Weston is our consultant. He's been working really closely with me over the last 3 years to design the nuts and bolts of it, and his expertise in biodiversity is immense.
Iford Biodiversity Project is the landmark project for biodiversity gain. So it's got great presence in the landscape in the national park, and it's diverse across various different habitats. I've been working in land management, getting on for 25 years. So it's been great to be able to apply that experience and knowledge to a whole landscape scale project like Iford.
We've done a huge amount of work over the last 3 years, and it started off with assessing the habitats we've already got on the estate, what condition they're in, and then thinking a lot about what we can turn them into. The South Downs National Park is a really important stakeholder as well.
My name's Nick Heasman. I work for the South Downs National Park Authority, and I'm a countryside and policy manager. The vision of Iford Estate is very in tune with the priorities for the South Downs National Park. So there's a real synergy there and a proper partnership. One of the benefits of buying into the vision and the plan at Iford Estate is you know you're going to have real integrity to what's being offered. It's going to be delivered, it's going to be well monitored, you're actually going to be proud of what you're buying into. It's not just a token approach.
The beauty of the agreements that we've got with the South Downs National Park, who monitor it, is that actually it's really easy to roll out for the next phase and the phase after that.
So in the last 3 years, we've developed a really exciting vision for Iford.
Our plans are to take the vast majority of the farm, about 2/3, and return it to nature. We've thought really carefully about how we do that. So it'll be a mix of grassland and scrubland and woodland. And straight away we're seeing species come back.
We've got a triple SI, that's a site of special scientific interest on the Brooks, and another site of special scientific interest on the Kingston Escarpment. One of the key themes is to try and create the linkages between those habitats.
Iford sits in this interesting interface between the Ouse Valley, the wetland, right up to the chalk grassland where you have up to 40 species per square metre, lots of orchids, amazing array of butterflies, and then going back down to that valley again where you're going to find very interesting wetland bird species such as lapwing.
Last year, the wetland was flooded for a long time, but as the water receded, the lapwings that have been there all winter stayed and they bred. And I've never seen a breeding lapwing on those fields before, and all of a sudden we've got them, and it's fantastic.
Iford has a plethora of species. Looking at that flora, there's some really iconic species there. So the round-headed rampion, right down to bird's foot trefoil and kidney vetch, an amazing sort of variety of flora which give real colour. But off the back of that, it's the invertebrates that then feed on those. So you might be lucky enough to see species such as the common blue or the Adonis blue butterfly. Beautiful sort of striking colour, and then you'll have fritillary species as well, and then a lot of skipper butterflies, meadow browns and more common species. What nature needs is space, and places like Iford offer that large-scale opportunity.
It's landscape scale. It's much better to have one big landscape recovery project than 1,000 small ones, and makes what we're doing much more relevant.
Development used to be the problem. Development now can be the solution for biodiversity net gain.
If you purchase biodiversity units from Iford, you're investing in the future of this landscape.
This is a massive project, and it's going to create really big gains for nature.
We made that film last autumn, and it's remarkable how things have moved on already just in the space of the last 6 months or so. I've only been given a very short period, so I just thought I'd give you a quick run through of perhaps some of the things that I haven't covered in the film. So this is us. We're wholly within the national park, located at the eastern end. We're just outside the town of Lewes, not far from Brighton. But as we've illustrated in the film, it's a really diverse farming estate. It runs from the very wet land to the east, all the way up onto the tops of the South Downs to the west. And I think it's a very traditionally farmed estate in many ways. As I said, it's been family owned since 1895. It runs to about 1,200 hectares. And I think we followed a fairly typical journey through the 20th century. We intensified in the post-war period in response to the political and market pressures that we were experiencing. And then more recently, we've diversified into various enterprises. But as I alluded to in the film, we've always tried to farm with nature in mind. But it's always been against the backdrop of a profitable agricultural enterprise, because, as I say to people, you can't be green if you're in the red. I think we can trace the journey to a more nature focus back to this document, which we produced in 2018, our whole estate plan, which we did with the National Park, and which was one of Tim's brainwaves, I think. And I think for us, it highlighted and probably quantified for the first time exactly what ecosystem services we were already providing. And I think we knew that they were there, but actually just writing them down and quantifying them really helped. And it began to get me thinking about how they could be improved and even monetized. And you know, perhaps you can be green to stop you being in the red. On the back of that, and meanwhile, we were also beginning to think about the climate, the changing climate, the biodiversity crash, and what contributions we could make to stop this crisis. And on a more local level, as you saw in the film, we've been badly flooded now for 2 or 3 years. We're experiencing really long, dry spells in the spring, which is really affecting our arable enterprises. So we've been thinking about strategically about how we can manage the estate for the next 50, 100 years with all these factors in mind. And then in 2020, DEFRA launched a biodiversity net gain credits pilot scheme, which was designed to make the national credits, which we talked about earlier, to an outlet for any investment which came into them. And so we worked with DEFRA for the last 4 years or so. with a lot of funding from then to actually design what became our nature recovery project. And I think having that funding freed us to design things from the bottom up. So we looked at things like historic land use, old maps, priority habitats, statutory designations. We mentioned the triple SIs in the film, and all of our species records as well, to design a scheme that really works in the landscape. I've always thought it's important that whatever we do is going to be there for at least 30 years and probably in perpetuity. So it's got to be right. And not least of which, really, because I'm going to have to live with it and look at it every day. And after a lot of iterations, and we did some landscape appraisals and some hydrology work and all that sort of stuff, and we came up with some really good maps, that being one of them. Some nice maps, lots of words, but it's all got to be financed. And I've discussed already that the agricultural enterprise isn't really viable enough to provide the support to deliver projects like this. And the numbers are pretty eye-watering once you start factoring in things like land value change, lost income over 30 or 40 or 50 years, and the management costs and all those factors. It becomes a big number. And traditional environmental routes of funding like countryside stewardship and more recently SFIs, they're simply not secure enough to deliver this sort of lasting change. They're at the whim of government policy changes, and we really need long-term and large-scale funding to deliver this. And that's where the National Park really came into things. The obvious thing for us to start looking at, particularly given what we'd already done with DEFRA on the National Credit Scheme, was to begin to tap into the private BNG market. But for that, we needed an engaged local authority to develop these legal agreements and to get us market ready. I think we were lucky that the National Park were thinking at that time along similar lines, and just so happened that they launched a call for nature sites, and through that process we spent a year or so working together to deliver this, which was, I think, probably one of the first Habitat Bank Section 106s in the country. And then following on from that, we signed up for the register, and we delivered this first phase of what will become, hopefully, an 800-hectare landscape recovery project. The first phase is 32 hectares. It's really a toe in the water for us to begin to take some learnings about how we can deliver it, how we can market it, and what sort of revenues we can get from it. And so we established that last spring, and we've been planting scrub through the winter, and it's looking really good, but it is only still a small part of the whole vision. I think we've always aspired to be gold standard, best in class and high integrity, to help us stand out from what is going to inevitably become a really crowded marketplace with lots of people competing to offer particularly biodiversity units. And I think I just wanted to sort of really close on this sort of partnership theme, and it's come up a lot today, I think, about partnerships and collaboration and cooperation. And I think our relationship with the National Park certainly helps, because you mentioned it earlier, Tim, about trust. I think having an organisation like the National Park involved with it just adds to that level of trust. But it's become clear, I think, that BNG alone won't deliver enough funding. And I think, David, you were talking about that as well, weren't you? And it certainly won't deliver it quickly enough to deliver this, because now I've done the maps, I want to get on with it. And now the National Credit Scheme looks like it sort of might not come to anything for us anyway. We've begun to look at other sources of funding. So we've been looking to develop a voluntary biodiversity offset for some time, using actually that Nature Markets Framework document, which was really useful, sort of a real eye-opener for me to think that we could use the BNG framework to deliver voluntary markets and to tap into the whole ESG market. And I think actually in that market, having these sort of partnerships is even more important. And it's great to see this press release today about the voluntary markets. I think, as we've heard today, the problems and the scandals in the carbon world mean that these sort of local, properly verified, properly monitored schemes, with the visibility and the seal of approval and the trust that the organisations like the National Park can give us, will set us apart, I hope, from what will no doubt be hundreds of other organisations trying to do the same thing. It's a limited pot of money, and I've said nature recovery is really expensive if you do it properly. And we can't afford to have schemes that don't deliver. and ruin the credibility. And we've heard a lot about that today as well. We're only a small business, really. There's only really me. And if my experience of BNG is anything to go by, it's really expensive even to get to the point of sale. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of pounds to do the baselining work, the design work. It's a huge commitment, and that's without the effort of actually engaging with the eventual sellers. It's much easier, I think, with the mandatory BNG because you know who you're talking to. But once you start looking at the voluntary market, trying to actually get in front of the people who've got the checkbooks, for someone like me, it's really difficult. So those partnerships are really important. And I think, you know, the more help that we can get with that, the better, really. I don't think we should underestimate the challenges. As I said, I've been lucky enough that our business, is big enough to support me in taking what's actually been a really big proportion of my time working on this. But the key question really is whether early adopters like us are going to be rewarded before we're forced to drop out through lack of sales. And I've not heard many examples outside of BNG and carbon of money actually changing hands. It was quite nice to hear about Aviva's investment earlier, but you know they're few and far between. But the good news is that there are opportunities coming. It's going to be competitive, we know that, for BNG and for ESG. But I've talked to companies that are keen and engaged with funding nature recovery, either on a philanthropic basis or to satisfy their contractual obligations with their customers. But they want, not surprisingly, clarity, we've heard this already, on what they're buying, assurances on that it's above board, that it's well managed, monitored, maintained, and all that for the long term. And I think that's where these partnerships can really help. Thank you.
Fabulous. Well, let's build straight on that. We're going to hustle straight into our next speaker. Delighted to introduce you to Nick Heasman, who in fact introduced himself in the video, just gone actually. So over to him. He's going to bring to life, he's one of our own. He's part of the National Park team here. He's been working hard on this and bring some of that to life in the next 10 minutes. Over to you, Nick.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all here. I'm reminded on days like this we talk about the park, but we're inside and really should be outside. My father bumped into my primary school teacher, Mrs. McKendrick, about 10 years ago, and he said, "How's Nick getting on these days?" And he said, "Oh, he's working in the South Downs." He said, "That's about right. He spent all his time looking out the window in school." So that's a little bit about me. But I'm here to talk to you about this opportunity, this time and place that we find ourselves in. Is that the right direction? There we go. Now I can actually see. It's fantastic. So just want to set the context in terms of the national policy and how we reacted at the National Park Authority to this. As stated today, there's been lots of different pressures, common agricultural policy to reform to that. The key green finance strategy set down this challenge, this real challenge of raising 500 million per year into nature recovery by 2027. Now, I'd like to know where we're getting to that and where we want to be, and beyond that, 1 billion to 2030 to address climate change and nature depletion. Following on from that, DEFRA's Environment Improvement Plan, which then sort of laid out exactly the same sort of framework for us. So back this up by the evidence of the State of Nature report and the decline, and what others have mentioned today, and Tim talking about 1 in 6 species now facing serious decline or extinction in the UK, really concentrated our mind at the National Park. What are we going to do about it? How can we do something to influence that? And how can we use green finance to achieve nature recovery? Now, we responded, and our response to the National Park was a call to arms. An action on nature recovery, a positive action, that was our plan. And so we set about asking people, call for nature sites. What is it you want to do? What is it we want to achieve? And how are we going to go about that? And so we set ourselves out at trying to get 33% of land by 2030 in the National Park committed to nature recovery, to nature. So that includes farmers and foresters and rangers and keepers, enthusiasts, community groups, passionate individuals, all united in a cause of getting to that 33% target. So our vision for green finance at the National Park Authority is broken down really into sort of essentially 3 areas. unlocking new finance for nature from the private sector, providing landowners with sustainable incomes and enabling nature restoration in the way that's not been possible before. Now, I was around when this national park was formed, and it's been mentioned today, we stand on the shoulders of giants, of people that have been managing this land for generations, through families, through trusts, local authorities, NGOs. We're here to facilitate, enable, and add value. And in green finance, we saw that opportunity to help, to facilitate, to enable, to add value to achieving that nature recovery. Our USP is a statutory planning authority, but also as an organisation with conservation at our heart. It's within our DNA. We are under the 1949 Act. That's what we're about that creating space for people, for nature, and enhancing that. That's really critical. 60% of the South Downs is in a farm cluster. We have excellent networks with foresters, 50% of foresters in a forum called the Forestry Champions. So let's play to our strengths and let us help those people to achieve the sort of landscape that we know and love dearly. And been mentioned today, it's wonderful from Tim first thing and also others, but talking about that bigger, better, more joined up approach, it is, and as Matthew alluded to, sometimes it's that small hectareage can make a difference if it is linking species or habitat. So we've been very much focused on that. And to reiterate that point, we've sort of been mapping, creating a nature recovery network across the national park, the third largest national park in the UK, 24% woodland cover, only 3-4% of chalk grass and lift. However, there is enormous opportunity out there. There is enormous opportunity. So we've mapped the potential, and there is a choice to be made. We're not always gifted with opportunities, certainly in my career, like green finance can offer. It's often short-term thinking. But when we should make the choice to make that right decision. We can restore nature, retain livelihoods, and leave a legacy. We can do it all, and we have that choice. We have that opportunity. So in our approach, as well as looking at developing, as Ben alluded to, the B&G model, our early days were looking at nutrient neutrality. Others have mentioned before, but certainly in the national park, sometimes we found 3 trees planted in a paddock. Someone said, nutrient neutrality. We're like, what? So we wanted to see something that was going to really add value to people, to nature recovery. And so we've developed a suite of opportunities, and some of these are at different places. And mentioning 18 years of development of the Environment Bank, sometimes it feels as long as that to do, but I think it needs that commitment, that faith that what you're aiming to do is get to that point where you can really offer something that's going to make a difference. So within our nutrient neutrality, B&G, and the launch of voluntary B&G, which is very exciting today, we're also looking to develop a woodland carbon platform for the South Downs National Park. The opportunity to create woodland that will actually not only just be trees shoved in the ground, but will deliver on multiple objectives. And so we're working hard on that at the moment, and hopefully if we have a return session here or one day or a bespoke one, we can certainly be offering that and enabling that with others in the room. So the journey so far, it is always a journey. It feels like a journey, and sometimes there'll be things in your way, bramble, potholes, very relevant at the moment, trees falling down. But since I'm working on Renature credits and working with partners, we've achieved up to 500 hectares of land for nature recovery with another 4,000 committed. And this is a really exciting time. It's a really exciting chance for us to make some significant difference. And so with this journey, this is just the start. We know it's just the start. We know the challenges that are ahead of us. But if we take this journey together, we can take the opportunity of green finance to be innovative, to be collaborative, and deliver a better, brighter future for nature and for people. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Nick. And the screen's going to go up in a moment, and we'll rattle straight into the third. So to this time starting to look at a national level. So it's Again, my great pleasure to introduce you all and welcome to the stage Naomi Conway from the Director at National Parks Partnerships. Naomi, over to you.
Hello, everyone. That's not a mistake. I haven't got any slides, so that's why it's going up. As James says, I'm Naomi Conway. I'm Director of National Parks Partnerships, and that's the entity that works for all 15 of the UK's national parks. I'm also the co-director of an initiative called Revere, that's a partnership together with a company called Palladium that's aiming to leverage £240 million worth of private finance into national parks nature restoration by 2030, but a bit more about that later. MPP creates UK-level strategic partnerships for the national parks, mostly with private sector partners, but really any funder who can help us as parks to do more. And since early 2023, MPP has also been directly funded by DEFRA to deliver work, particularly around green finance for national parks and national landscapes. So with just 10 minutes, or maybe even less, I wanted to share 3 main learnings and insights from my work in the green finance for nature restoration in the UK's national parks. And every speaker today has kind of laid the ground ahead of me to explain some of the fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve here. My first reflection, I guess, is that, and it's been picked up on already, that this is not business as usual for our sector. There's a lot of talk and some expectation that environmental NGOs and national parks just do green finance. Just go out and do it. Just grab that money. It's all there. Go and do it. But if there's one thing I've learned since getting involved in this space, it's that private finance for nature restoration is very far from business as usual for us. I think ENGOs and national parks are really good at securing public and private funding for good work and for good projects. And through no fault of our own, our model is very project focused and can be short term. And we devise projects and we seek the funding, we secure it, and then it kind of finishes. So it delivers positive outcomes, but it has been very stop-start, and it's very rarely capacity building. And engaging with private finance isn't what national parks were set up to do, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it, but it means we do need to think in a very different way. I think national parks have got a huge amount to add to the development of a positive, ethical, nature-first natural capital market in the UK. And I think a bit, as Nick has described, it's our landscape level thinking that makes sense to us, but also makes sense to investors who don't want to fund small projects here and there, but they want to fund larger scale projects that are interconnected, that deliver impact and efficiencies and, impact and nature restoration at scale. So there's a real place where our vision as national parks and that of investors and private finance really meets well together, and we should be taking advantage of that. And I think the South Downs is a brilliant example as a national park of how new thinking and some measured risk-taking can reap rewards. Events like today remind us how national parks can be the conveners, powerful conveners, of those who want to make change happen and to help build what I've heard recently called a restoration economy, which I really like that thinking. I'm going to start using that term, restoration economy, a lot now. But it is challenging. National parks aren't rich, well-resourced entities, so this is new work that isn't funded well, and I think we need support as national parks from all types of funders, government included, to do more in this space. I think national parks should be tasked to do more as well, because we've got particular things that we can deliver, so we can help develop high-quality landscape-scale nature restoration projects together with landowners. And we can deliver services required by a restoration economy, be it measurement, monitoring, advisory, assurance, or delivery. My second reflection is we can't do this alone. And again, thanks to the other speakers for talking about partnerships, I'm going to make that point again. My own experience of it is, in terms of national parks partnerships, is that our progress in the space of green finance for nature restoration has been really catalysed through what's been quite a radical collaboration, I think, together with a company called Palladium, which started in 2020, and that partnership is called Revere. Palladium is a global company that delivers large-scale positive impact projects across the globe for international, mostly governmental clients. And when I first met them in 2020, they told me about their experience of developing and running international projects that had leveraged about $1 billion worth of private finance, for example, investment into sustainable land and forest use across Indonesia, Africa, and Latin America. I learned that they wanted to explore creating that same kind of impact in the UK, and had a really fruitful conversation with them, and it was a matter of the right place, the right time for us as national parks to talk to Palladium, because we had a need. We had identified 19 nature restoration projects, and we called them Net Zero with Nature, and I've been touting it around the marketplace, talking to companies about it. But I'd found that companies and investors wanted to explore these projects, but were most interested in the projects that could deliver ecosystem services like carbon sequestration or avoidance, water quality improvements, or biodiversity gain. But Parks and MPP, my entity, we just didn't know enough about this. So Palladium provided the missing piece of that puzzle for us. They had a lot of expertise and insight and acumen that meant we could create the Revere partnership. Has been really catalytic. In the last 3.5 years, we've secured several £1 million worth of funding to develop pilots and to establish project structures and models that can unlock private capital into nature restoration. That's been done alongside national parks, but crucially with landowners together to test the models, because these models must work for landowners. As Ben was saying, they need to be profitable, otherwise the restoration just won't happen. We've run 15 pilots. We now have a pipeline across the UK that has a requirement of well over £100 million worth of investment across 35 projects, and we've got some really advanced conversations with investors. So we're getting towards that impactful scale that we couldn't not have done alone as national parks. So I do believe that it's these radical and strategic collaborations that are key to progress in this space. My last reflection is this is just the beginning. What I've learned through my immersion into private finance for nature since 2020 is that, in my view, we're at the very, very start of what I think is a 30 to 50 year shift from extractive towards regenerative economic models. And I do think within our world, and that's national parks or maybe even the non-profit sector more widely and the environmental sector, we talk a lot about the barriers to making progress, and these aren't inconsiderable. But I also feel that we can sometimes let perfect be the enemy of progress. And I'm really passionate that protected landscapes like national parks and the national landscapes play a central role in the developing natural capital market in the UK. It's absolutely key that we are part of something that has high quality nature first principles at its heart, that supports land managers, owners and farmers, the custodians of the land, to stay on the land and to have a viable livelihood, and that supports local communities to have a stake in their landscapes. So if we let the challenges and the barriers stop us from engaging, then everyone loses. But I do think we need to accept we probably won't see the change at the scale and the pace we'd like to see straight away, and that's a bit frustrating. So we need to engage what's been called cathedral thinking, where we build the foundations without quite knowing what the roof will look like. I'm very sure it's the right thing to proactively move things forward right now and to collaborate, to find solutions, and to play our part in a shift towards the better world that we all want to build. Thank you.
I'm just going to invite Ben and Nick back up to grab a seat, get comfortable. Right. A little bit of Q&A logistics just working its way out. So this is a chance to turn to you, because we're acutely aware it's been sort of from the stage broadcast in your direction so far. This is a chance, I hope, to ask some questions. So there is at least one roving mic. I've got a second here if anybody would care to come and grab it. So who's going to help kick us off? I have a couple to get up. We've got a wonderful panel to bring this to life. Anybody got a question straight away? Oh, wonderful. If you could just wait, and if you'd be kind enough just to help us, could you say who you are and where you're from, but just before you do share that question?
Is this working? No? Yes? Right.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Andrew Swain. I work for a company called Ricardo, and I was a member of the South Downs Partnership. So I have a little bit of insight. It comes back to a conversation I had with Trevor very early on when I got involved in the partnership, particularly for Ben. We have to get investment, we have to get biodiversity gain. We also need employment, because national parks need to be thriving economies. So how's your project going to deliver changes in jobs and hopefully a net increase in jobs?
Thanks ever so much for that. Do you want to grab that microphone? I'm not sure if you managed to convey that, but it's all right, I'll share the question. So the question was just really rooting this, bring this back to the economy, bring this back to creating jobs and where that's gone.
We have to have a viable economy to have a viable ecosystem, and it's a complicated interaction. So how's Ben's project as a massive case study going to help employment?
Well, I think it really will help employment. In terms of our staffing at home, I don't see it changing. I think their roles might change a little bit. They're not going to be tractor drivers so much as they'll be looking after livestock perhaps. But I think there's a whole load of new jobs coming, ecology jobs, sort of ranger type jobs, and tourism type jobs. And I can see that the team's going to grow massively if I can get the whole thing delivered.
I suppose there's a point about systems thinking as well, which is the very people who are buying into those credits, they're going to be doing other developments which in their own right become viable in that system and generate other economic activity as well. So I think this is the point for much of this, is thinking in fragments takes us so far, but when we start to knit the whole thing together, and hopefully perhaps come back to the national park role. National parks I'll do exactly that thing. They think in those systems terms. Fabulous. Next question. Let's jump to the right. Lady.
I just wanted to add to the answer. I visited the Napa State the other day, and when it was a conventional farm, they had a not profit-making conventional farm, mainly loss-making conventional farm. They had 18 employees, and now 20 years later, after starting on the rewilding journey, they have 200 employees. So I think that's a number worth sharing. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. And there's a gentleman just in front of you. We'll go there next.
Hi, William Vine from Rebalance Earth. We're building a fund to invest in UK restoration at landscape and catchment scale, addressing some of the really big numbers that some people have been talking about today. I think James mentioned fairly early on that there's a lack of buyers here, and getting to that kind of scale is going to depend on finding the partners who are potentially buying the ecosystem services that these restoration projects will develop. So my first question is, what's your thinking and journey and support needs around that? And my second question is, while you're developing these big visions, what could you do if money wasn't the limiting factor? What could you do with 10 times your budget?
Good, that's a beguiling question. So, a seductive question. We'll come to that second one in a moment. The buyers, are they out there? Naomi, do you want to kick us off? Because you've been going out looking for buyers.
Yes, it must be said it's to simplify it, it's easier to find investors than buyers. But buyers are out there. When it comes to something like carbon, the majority of purchasing has been happening in the tropics, where the carbon market started, quite rightly. It wasn't intended to be a sort of northern hemisphere initiative. So it's quite new in Europe and the north. And it's also will be much more, already is and will become more expensive compared to tropical settings. So, but the evidence that I've gathered through talking to hundreds of companies, but really the serious buyers are the global, the big companies. I mean, just yesterday there was the coalition of Microsoft, Google, Meta and Salesforce making a forward market commitment to buy 20 million nature carbon units. Where those will be globally will be interesting to see, but that's probably about £1 billion+ worth commitment. And they understand that it's making that commitment that will enable the creation of a pipeline of projects, because that's answering this question, are there buyers? Yes, we will buy 20 million units to these criteria. So the market's moving forward, like where the buyers are stating what their criteria are better, they're committing to volumes. And I think the hope is that it's those kinds of things that will take us towards a tipping point where actually the big guys who have committed, they've set their internal carbon price, they've committed to purchasing, will just start to do this in a much more, in an easy to access way, you know, procuring through as four massive companies rather than individually. So I'm not naive about the challenges of around buying, around carbon. Other markets, I'm less sure about the market for BNG, but we're taking the punt that the indicators now are showing that there will be a bigger, stronger market where people are willing to pay the right price as well. So I think we have to build it on that basis, hoping that they will come and that there are buyers now as well. It's not that there's no one, but it's quite hard work to find them and strike the deals.
And Nick, anything you'd add from your experience the last few years?
I think it seems very complex from the outside. You look in and it's quite scary. It's a lot of terminology. With the team in the National Park, we've often had this little discussion at point of sale. Could you make it so easy? It's like a transaction online. So simple, but that we've got all the principles, all the ethics, everything is sorted out, and they're guaranteed to buy a quality product. That's really the dream where we want to get to. And if they want to come and access the site, come and see the site, see that benefit of nature right there, we can facilitate that as well. But we're also thinking at that lower level, certainly in carbon, whether there's 98% of businesses in the National Park or SMEs, we're also thinking, is there opportunity for sale carbon at that scale rather than at the very large scale? So there's buyers, but I think the approach and the marketing approach needs to be efficient and savvy.
Thanks for that. And there was a project in Scotland, the £1 billion challenge, and they characterised a chasm and of incomprehension in scale. And on one side you had environmentalists, and on the other side you had investors. And essentially, all of the work was to how do you get across, how do you bridge that chasm? And the ambition is not one superhighway bridge; it's many different bridges that serve the purpose. But it's to address that scale of the numbers that are talked about are totally different. The language, and I think language is something we've touched on regularly as being a barrier. And Naomi, I'm aware that some of those pilots, actually a lot of the biggest lessons are not that the appetite doesn't exist, it's how to close the deal, because the evidence, all of the lawyers and everybody else that creep into the middle ground sort of slow the process up. The second question was money's no object. You may have something to add to the first question, but the money's no object question, I suppose I'd just be fascinated to let it run for a moment or two.
If money's no object, what can we do? I guess we could do more. I mean, with our BNG, we're looking to create neutral grassland, because I think that chalk grassland, for example, is too difficult to create in a 30-year term. I guess if money's no object, you look at nutrient stripping, topsoil stripping, you could create chalk grassland. I guess there is more you could do. I think probably on a practical level, the BNG will provide sufficient money to do what we want to do, if it stays where it is.
God, I thought we'd entertain that for a little while, but the Christmas lists can come out later. Are there any other questions? We've had a couple. In the centre, yeah. Alicia.
I'm wanting a bit of an update on the Green Nature credit. So are you using BNG as your measurement? Any issues with that? How are you thinking about claims? Just interested, not trying to put you on the spot.
So, sorry, Alicia, that was about
updating your BNG credits.
Your Renature credits. I can see them on the logos and the press release. So what are you selling?
Renature credits. So it's not BNG, just BNG.
But measuring with BNG, like the same number?
Yes. So voluntary BNG will use sorry, I've got there in the end.
Yeah, sorry.
Voluntary BNG will use exactly the same framework as BNG. And that's the idea, to make it so for land managers such as Ben, that what we've done is aggregate down to smaller units. So if people want to purchase those, and then working with Earthly, finding the market where smaller business might want to make that contribution, might want to get ahead of the game. So we thought, there's a lot of people looking at it, and we thought, well, the simplest thing is just to sort of break it down into smaller units. And then it's a system that we're all used to. Otherwise, we create another rule book. It's more complex, isn't it? So it needs to be simple. And I think the market's moved so fast, I think we would have all appreciated that framework early on, but we've kind of had to create that. And I think that's where for us being a planning authority and a conservation body, we were like, right, we could see both of those, that chasm a little bit, and then working with Naomi and Ben to get there. But yeah, it's keeping it simple, I think, is really important, I think. Ben?
In the early days, we were looking at using some of those sort of basket of metric type approaches to value the voluntary offsetting, but I was always really hesitant about them because it's completely unquantifiable. You're trying to predict what species you might get in 10 years' time and what bugs you might find. The beauty of using the metric is that it's quantifiable, and you know that if you create that habitat, you'll generate those units, and you can sell those units. And it's for me as a land manager, it's so much easier to understand and comprehend and to budget as well, because you've got a huge upfront cost. And if for whatever reason on the day you measure the skylarks are all next door, you know, you're a bit stuffed and you don't get any money that year. So you using the metric as a mechanism for selling voluntary credits to me just makes perfect sense. And it was a real light bulb moment when I started reading that Nature Markets Framework paper.
Fabulous, thank you. I'm just looking at the back. I'll see if I'm missing any hands. Any others? Yeah, just on the left, well, my left.
Julian Bendel, Butterfly Conservation. Whether we've talked about sort of BNG and selling sort of ecosystem services, and that to unlock that sort of finance seems to be around creating habitats or enhancing habitats. Is there any green finance available for maintaining existing habitats? Because there's quite a cost in that involved, but that doesn't seem to feature anywhere.
An excellent question, which I detect a few people in the room squirming. Anything any of you would, Nick, perhaps would you be able to kick us off?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We've had discussions. Fundamentally, you can undertake an assessment of an existing habitat and make that assessment and whether it's in low, moderate or high condition. So that does offer you opportunity to increase the quality of that existing habitat. However, we're also very conscious that for certain habitats, it's the right management. So when to graze, when not to graze, or using a stewardship framework, or that might be better. And what we want to see is, we know the challenge that's there in terms of nature recovery, and we don't want to gild the lily. We want to make sure that we can restore and recreate using it to achieve this really powerful tool, using it in the right place. I think that's my general feeling. There are opportunities to uplift, there's no doubt about it. We've looked at sort of woodland potential, but I think sometimes I'm conscious of using this tool in the right place. I don't know if Naomi or...
I'm not a specialist on the ecology of it, but as I understand it, the codes as they stand don't allow one to sort of sell a credit on the basis of just maintaining something. That was when I first learned about the Great North Bog, which is the huge expanse of peatland, and I learned about the great stuff the team had done there in the last 30 years to restore it and effectively seal it and stop it from emitting carbon. I was like, great, can we sell all the carbon you've saved in the last 30 years, you've stopped being emitted, can those be sold on the market? That was my beginners sort of like, yeah, great. And they were like, no, the code doesn't allow for that. I think there are some international codes that do enable you to generate credits for keeping woodland standing. I don't know whether the codes, and there are nascent codes that are coming for all soil and others, may eventually reward for maintaining it. But I think it might not be through markets. I think there's more of an argument for other streams of funding, government funding. You know, there's a big call, you know, globally, just pay indigenous communities to maintain the 80% of the land that they maintain. That's actually much more efficient than trying to create a market around it. So it's almost a separate issue, I think, of the value of maintaining what we have. It is great, but I don't think, but I don't have the complete picture that private finance is currently the route for that. I think there would be other funding means for that important work.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. And we'll just bring a microphone to the front. There's a question, or maybe a point to follow up. But whilst that's happening, there are some... I guess the principle makes eminent sense. It's about additionality, because if we simply stay where we are, we make no progress. And banking that is important, but we've got to make progress. So the principle makes eminent sense, but the byproduct of it is that the value that is there already, those pockets of pristine places, the value around those is arguably lower. And you've seen this in some land deals, actually, especially up in Scotland, where land which has been really heavily degraded is oddly attracting a greater value than some land that's in fabulous condition because of the opportunity that goes with it. But it does feel like we're exploring this as separate things, where one is about a market to drive that additional, but actually other things are at play. But I'm pleased, one of our speakers, so Professor Hill, dive in.
Is this working? Yeah. So I'm trying to do some thinking around this, what's called avoided loss. And I have to say, having read quite a bit around this, I'm really not happy about it at all, because it has perverse consequences. So Indigenous people say, right, well, I'll cut my forest down then, unless you give me the dosh. And so we really don't want to see that. And if you look at the forest around Lake Kariba, I've just been reading about, you'd realise it's a really bad idea. But I think that it's really about building a voluntary and hopefully at some point a mandated biodiversity credit market for that uplift. And as has been said, there are other mechanisms where we ought, as policy, as government policy, to protect those sites, so that the landowner who says, well, it's not fair because I've just been looking after this for 50 years and I don't get anything, thanks very much. We need to address that, because it will lead to perverse damage, I think, and we've got to avoid that at all costs. Sorry, that was all. I just want to say that what a fantastic project the Iford is. And I've read about it a lot, but it's just to see it in pictures is amazing. Fantastic project.
And thanks for that insight. And I think for those who can influence policy in the room, take note. There's an action there. We need to make sure we don't lose sight of that, and we do put pressure on that side of things. I see a few questions popped up. Forgive me, I didn't catch who was first, but I will go to the back of the room first, if that's okay. Lady in the far back corner. You're about to get 2 microphones, then no microphones. We're nearly there. Right, success.
Hello, Grace Olsen, Natural England. The local nature recovery strategies will map areas that will benefit from a 15% uplift with BNG. I guess my question is, do you foresee there being a relationship between the local nature recovery strategies and nature credits?
Thank you very much. Anyone want to kick off? You've got the microphone. You go for it.
Absolutely. We see there's a sort of strategic map through the Downs and where we think nature might be best placed. But sometimes it's not just environmental, it's social. So it's the willing of the owners. And I think it's the same with the LNRS, the willingness of the owners to wanting to say, yes, we're contributing. And I'm going to pass the mic to Ben, because as being a land manager, and whether he's keen to see involvement in LNRS.
Yeah, I have tried to engage with the nature recovery strategies. It's been evolving. It's another call on fairly limited time, so there's a limit to how much I can do.
And I wonder if that's something that, again, we've got the beauty of a mixed audience here, but to address those that can influence paperwork, this just seems heavy, and I wonder what can we do to make it simpler. There was an observation earlier just about that simplicity at the point of sale. We can buy, well, I could give you a challenge, and I imagine within 30 seconds most of you could have bought a pair of roller skates on Amazon. That's how simple things have become. Now, I'm not saying this could be that quick, but how quick could it be? How could we hide the wiring, as some might put it, to allow those that are actually interfacing this to not have to give them an entire day job to just fill paperwork in?
But I think it could actually be as quick as buying roller skates on Amazon if we wanted it to be. There's no reason why it couldn't be.
Well, there we go. That's the challenge, and forgive me for drawing Amazon into this room. Apologies all. There was another question at the back. If we could move to that gentleman, that'd be great.
Thank you. A question for you, Ben. Do you see the BNG as a gateway into green finance on the landscape? I mean, have you future-proofed the contracts so that you can take advantage in the future of phosphate neutrality, nitrate neutrality, stacking other green finance benefits across the same landscape? Is that something that you've considered?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we haven't got any nutrient neutrality possibilities at Iford because we're not in the right zones. For sure, if it comes along, we can stack it on top. And I think actually, if we can offer a one-stop shop for a developer and satisfy their nutrient needs, their biodiversity needs, possibly their carbon needs, and their ecosystem services, then we've got a really attractive package to offer, and that can help set us out from the crowd, I hope.
Fabulous. Just looking around for Right, well, good. All the questions come just in the dying minutes, so let's see how we can do. We'll rattle through. Can we go for the... yes, perfect.
Hello. Well, hi. I'm Kate. I'm with the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. Sorry, it's sort of squeaky. I'm just wondering, with the loss of BPS, with all the farmers that we work with, the countryside stewardship and SFI aren't necessarily making up that shortfall in finance that the landowners that we work with traditionally had funding-wise. And the government has sort of been touting these independent green finance options as the way that they're going to make up their shortfalls in the future. But kind of what I've seen today with all of, very interesting speakers and panelists saying is there's a large amount of money that you kind of need up front to sort of enter some of these options. So I'm just wondering what you all see as an option for some of our smaller landowners and farmers as a way to access some of these options moving forward.
Fabulous. Who wants to... So there's big nods in the middle. Nick, you keep... or do you want to kick us off, Ben?
Yes. You go first. That's a brilliant question, really good question. I think I was privy to an excellent presentation by a landowner a couple of years ago who's worked with farming his entire career, and he showed that only 30 to 40% of farms actually produce an annual budget. And I think with a loss of BPS, and thinking of a friend who's farming at the moment, he's set aside on a largely arable land 40 hectares, really significant component for new woodland. And he's done that hard, real cost analysis and worked out that he's losing money by farming those areas, and he's going to concentrate on producing food on those better areas. Now, he's lucky because I think he's been at a bit of a crossroads in his life. But I think that element of business planning, and understanding is really important to be efficient. I think good advice is always really, really important. And I think sometimes people like Ben have been pioneers, so they've actually trodden that path already. I see the costs involved in getting set up reducing over time. And I think that often comes with that Ben's taken probably more, has taken that bit of burden from literally being the one to whack his way through the thicket to go on.
Yeah, and I think coming back to your point about stewardship and SFI, you're right that it's just, and as I mentioned in my notes, it's just not long term enough. If you're making structural changes to your business, getting rid of machinery, altering your labour profiles and all that sort of thing, for a 3-year agreement, it just doesn't work. So SFI has a place for sure, but it's never going to deliver lasting long-term change, I don't think.
Thank you. And we'll take one more. There was a couple of hands up. Gentleman, yeah.
Hi, Simon Deacon, Portsmouth Water. The other side of it is sort of the regulatory framework. So as a water company, we actually have a duty to look after the land that we own. And going back to maintaining land, we've got something called no detriment. So we get penalised if the land falls back into unfavourable conditions. And that's a really good thing because it gives an incentive for us to actually deliver that. But obviously that's a regulated business, and we're talking about land really that isn't regulated, so private land. And I do see that as an issue. Looking at farms and things like that, there is no incentive to keep land in good condition.
Any observation to share off?
Well, I guess we did have those regulations until the end of BPS, but I think we feel an obligation to do it anyway. I don't see land falling into poor condition on any great scale as I look around the countryside, personally.
Yeah, I think there's the changes I've seen in farming, the most intensive in arable landscapes I've known in the Downs. I'm starting to see livestock integrated, cover crops, min-till coming in. For those that were 20 years ago sort of laughing really behind their hand in the pub that will never work, and they're the ones that are doing it now. I think there's a realisation soil is more than dirt, isn't it? I mean, that has come into agriculture massively, and I think there's a new generation of land managers coming through which really get it. And I think we've got to be much, much more efficient and effective. Like Ben, I don't know areas of land that are being abused as much as they were in the past. And that was, fundamentally, I think that was BPS that was doing it. So there is changes, because realistically, you can't justify farming those poor grade land. And there's a farmer I know in this room who says the South Downs has never been a breadbasket. We have never really, we pushed it hard for a good reason. We had to survive as a nation. But now I think working out where the best soils are, how we do that with technology, and working out the most efficient way is the way to go. Nature likes the poor bits of ground. It likes those stony bits. It likes those wet bits. And that's where we need to focus on nature recovery.
Fabulous. And forgive me, but the clock, time and tide wait for no man, I think, is that the phrase. So we are going to draw this session to a close. If I could just ask you to share your thanks for our panel, Naomi Conway, Nick Heasman and Ben Taylor. So we've got a 10-minute break. Please don't go too far. We will start promptly. We'll see you all back here for that session and as we head towards the last part and close of the day. Thank you.